The champion quickly goes through. Let's go as well.
I'd like to introduce to you someone who I personally know very well. He's had an incredible career, not just in swim coaching, but also as a helicopter pilot as well. Balancing the work life of a pilot and being a volunteer swim coach, he has reached many heights in more ways than one, so no pun intended there. His out-the-box thinking and ability to constantly strive for answers, solutions, and performance, he ended up developing a swim rate monitoring device in the mid-1990s called the Aquapacer. It took swim analysis to a whole new level. 1 in 3 Olympic gold medalists from the Sydney Olympic Games had used and trained with this device, leading into the Games, allowing him to travel and work with many Olympians, such as our very own Olympic silver medalist Paul Palmer, American triple Olympic champion Brooke Bennett, as well as Ian Thorpe at the tender age of 17, just before he broke his first world record, to name just a few of the individuals that he worked with. The Aquapacer was certainly a piece of technology ahead of its time and represented a breakthrough in training, stroke maintenance, and pacing. As a swim coach, he has been a constant presence in both the British and Scottish elite teams and is one of the most well-respected and knowledgeable coaches out there. I certainly wouldn't be the athlete that I am today without him, so I'd like to introduce to you my dad, my inspiration in sport, Patrick Miley.
Oh, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Thank you for that. That was lovely. That was really nice.
I'm sat here and I feel like I'm about to get emotional, Hannah. Thanks for that.
That would be a good start for all of us, would it?
All of us crying. Yeah, Patrick, welcome to the podcast. It's an honour to have you on, especially, you know, you're an absolute legend within the swimming world, which is obviously where I know you from. And something that I wanted to bring up just today was, I think you always seemed to sense when I was really nervous or I looked a little bit like a rabbit in headlights on poolside. And you always managed to calm me down and bring me back down to, okay, you're fine. You know what you're doing. You've got this. And it always made me feel so much better. So from a personal perspective, thank you for that.
Wow, thank you. That's really, really lovely to hear. I do really appreciate that. I've watched 1 or 2 of the podcasts. I'm sorry I'm behind. I tried to catch up, but I'll be very honest here. I very much hear what you're saying, Lauren. It's not that I don't hear you, Hannah, but I just notice the way in which you do this job. I think it's excellent. So it's like we're table tennis compliments here, but I feel very much like that. I can see how intuitive you are and how smart you are with regard to, I don't know, emotional intelligence or whatever that is. But thanks for that. That's very, very, very well received. As I get older, I feel like I recognise it's probably the one thing I would want to be remembered for more than anything else. So thank you. Thank you.
You'll definitely be remembered for it, because I know it's not just me who feels that way. A lot of people's faces brightened up on poolside when you were around. So yeah, no, it's an absolute honour to have you on, like I said. And I know that your story is one that's got so much to it. So I'd love to get started on Patrick and how you kind of came into the sport world. So from when you were younger, and just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I often will be heard to refer myself as second generation Irish. My parents are Irish immigrants. My father sadly is not with us, but my mother's still living down in Birmingham. And I was born in the same house where she still lives. And in fact, I was born in the upstairs front bedroom in the same house where she still lives, where she still sleeps. And they were very much working class. They were coming over from Ireland in order to get money as a family. Both are from 9 children. So my father was the eldest male in his family, and my mother was the youngest female as a twin in her family. So a whole mass of Irish came into the UK at that time, post-war, and they produced children like myself, my brother, my sister. And I think it was really tough for them, really, really tough. So the 1960s in Birmingham as Irish immigrants was a tough place to be. And I guess the one strength they had was a willingness and ability to work and keep working, and therefore pass on the opportunity of education to their children. So I think that's where the generations and the connections, not disconnect, but change. So we were very much aware that our education was probably the single most important thing in our lives, and we worked towards it. As far as swimming is concerned, I love to swim, and I swam a lot. My dad taught me to swim, and I can remember going swimming with him, and I remember how much he enjoyed being in the water. But my sister was a world champion Irish dancer. I think she was in an 8-hand reel, I think it was, and part of a world championship winning team. And the family were hugely focused on going to what they call feshes, which is your equivalent of a swim meet. So a dancing fesh. I wasn't a dancer. And having with all the Irish dancing fame and fortune with different dance companies, I kind of wish I had. I think I'd be a lot fitter and a lot better for it. But my sister was very, very successful. My family were hugely focused in it. And the older I've got, I think, oh, it's the same thing, but it's not dancing, it's swimming. It's the same sort of passion. However, on the outside, I was a middle child, and you were very sensitive as a middle child. It's like I just pushed myself with regard to swimming, and I enjoyed it. I remember with brother and sister, 3 of us went to 3 different secondary schools. Because at the time, you had an exam called the 11 plus. And if you passed it, you then went to perhaps your first choice school or perhaps your second. If you didn't pass, you were directed to a school. And we ended up in 3 different schools. I did pass. But it took me an hour and 20, between an hour and 20 and an hour and a half to get to school. So it was a long, long journey on several bus connections. So I was always ahead on vocabulary, reading, study, but I had the worst handwriting for anyone in the school because it was always done on a bus. So for 3 hours a day, I was studying, let alone being at school. But swimming, I just loved it, and I wanted to do it. And I joined a club called Triple S in Birmingham. There was a coach called Mr. Nash. That's what we did. Those days we called the coach Mr. Nash. And his son, Steve Nash, was actually at my school, who ultimately was, I believe, a relay bronze medalist at Commonwealth Games sometime. And I can remember my first school championships where he was swimming. I was just inspired. I mean, he had swimming goggles. So it was extraordinary. And I went to the meet that night. This is a bit of a sad story, but I won all of my races, which was, I think, a surprise to a lot of my colleagues because I think I was a wee bit podgy. I probably didn't look like a swimmer. But when I got home, my parents had been out, being Irish and, going to different functions. They were very social animals. And because they weren't home when I got back, I just hid the trophies. And it was about a year later when they found them. So I was very self-motivated, to be truthful, and had to save money. I got sort of weekend jobs and that to try and earn money to keep swimming, and couldn't enter competitions for the same reason. So I just loved it.
I always like to hear the start of someone's story within sport. I think it's so interesting to see how they got into it. And it's amazing to hear that, you were self-motivated in that way. Was it always just swimming when you were younger? Was it other sports, and how did that progress?
No, my main sport at school was probably rugby. I wanted to be better than I was, but I was okay. I played scrum half. Jumping many, many years, like probably mid-20s. I may have even been in the military at the time. I remember going back to an old boys game where the old school pupils would play against the present school team. And I thought, I'll take my kit along and I'll get to play maybe as scrum half or centre. But the scrum half was a lad called Nick Ledoyen, who was really, really good, and he took the place. And I ended up as hooker. And I think I still have the neck injuries from that game. But I did enjoy rugby. My mum won't be listening to this, but for quite a long time, she sort of not banned me, but said you can't play that game, because I did get injured once and I got sort of carried away. And I was playing hockey for a while, but I quickly went back to rugby, but just never told my parents. If you put football in front of me, soccer, I think a 3-year-old child would have more skills. I just have none whatsoever.
It's actually been quite nice. Sorry to interrupt there. Just hearing a lot of the stories, because there's even some bits, even though you are my dad, and there's many stories that you've kind of told me over the years. There's still stories that I hear now that I haven't heard before, and there's a lot there that I can really relate to I guess our journey that we've kind of grown up together. Yeah. One of the things that I remember you taking out with me from the sporting side was the importance of this Esso petrol station sticker book. And for me, that was quite a big, significant part for me in my career. But for you as a youngster, when you had this book, I just wondered if you could explain a little bit more about it and the relevance behind it.
I feel like running and fetching it. It was the 1972 Olympic Games, and I would have been 11 or 12 at that time. And my uncle got me the book, but we didn't have a car. So you couldn't get the petrol vouchers it used to get to save and stick into these books. But all it was an A4 size book, lots of coloured pictures in, lots of drawings, and they're all about the history of the Olympic Games. And then a section in the middle which had a chance where you could write the results for all the different sports. And the very centre pages actually were the results for swimming. And in handwriting, I've written in all of the times, every single one. And of course, it was the Olympics where Mark Spitz won 7 Olympic gold medals. And so I've written down all of them. And a small fact here, there's some point, don't ask me to remember because my memory is fading, but at some point I recognised that I'd met every single swimmer who had won at that point. And that was during your career, Hannah. But what I noticed as Hannah was developing, I got the book out and looked at it myself and just reflected at the time. And I realised that Hannah was swimming times that were quicker than some of the winning times in the 72 Olympics. And to put it in perspective, we were in a 4-lane pool that without question would have been voted the worst pool in the UK. Not the worst pool, probably the finest, but the worst pool to train in because the closest to it would be swimming in the North Sea. It was high walls, just rope, not a lane line. It was really difficult conditions. It was unpredictable. But brilliant because it develops character rather than focuses on perfection of the facility. And I noticed it. So I genuinely, it's interesting you say that because I remember giving it to you. I think you're probably about 14 or 15, thinking, I know what Hannah will find from this. I think she'll recognize, because I didn't say, oh, have a look at your times, just to take it away and read it. And she came back, and I'm not sure if the number's right, but I think you came back and said, I already got 10 gold medals, or I can't remember what it was, but it was more than Mark Spitz. So it became a real shift in perspective for me as a coach. I knew it, but then I was speaking to somebody, and Hannah was not the athlete she became. She was developing. There were a lot of swimmers around better, and a lot of swimmers progressing with a lot more support and opportunity. But it kind of worked the way I thought it would, which was a bit of nudging rather than telling. And I quite like to coach that way. So thanks for that memory, Hannah. Yeah, it's a good book.
Hannah has mentioned that book to me a few times, so I'm looking forward to one day hopefully actually seeing it in person. It's like this magical book that I keep hearing about. It's so nice to hear these stories because, again, like Hannah just said, I've heard them from her, but to hear them from you as well, Patrick, it's really special. Now, you mentioned the military about 5 minutes ago, and I'd love for you to just maybe give us a few stories about that, or I love your stories, so just take it away, Patrick.
I studied in Leicester, and my degree was in industrial design engineering, and I've never done anything with it since leaving it. But when I was studying, I'm pretty sure I was one of these immigrant children who didn't really know what they were doing because their parents didn't have the education, therefore couldn't know how to advise you. And I pretty much took all of the wrong subjects. And as a child, all I ever wanted to be was a doctor. How far away from being a doctor can you be? To be a helicopter pilot? I don't know. Although one friend of mine who's a helicopter pilot was a ballet dancer, and I think that was pretty good. But when I was studying, I did join the Royal Naval Reserve. Maybe some stuff you don't know. And I used to go from Leicester to Birmingham to the RNR Centre. I mean, what a place to have a naval base, Birmingham. It's just like there's no sea. But and I quite enjoyed it. I learned Morse code and had a strange uniform, just as a math blow, as you call it, as sort of a junior sailor. And it was good. I liked the discipline. I liked the difference. I was curious. I was really, really curious, especially with having an Irish background. It was the last thing on the planet that you'd be thinking of. And when I finished my degree, I didn't follow my career path, if you like, with design. I paused things. I kind of went back home, which is always a difficult thing to do. And I was driving lorries, delivering concrete, cement, and bricks. And previous to that, I'd been working as an ice cream man to make money at weekends. And there's a load of stories in that one as well, Laura. But I remember thinking, I think I want to consider the military. And actually, I went down to Portsmouth to it was in like an officer's mess or an experience down there. And it's interesting because the only person who spoke to me in the wardroom, which is the officer's mess, the bar, was a guy who was in civilian clothes. I only realised after we'd had a beer that he was in the army. He was an army major, and he was the only person who spoke to me. So I went home and I thought, oh, I'll join the army. They seem friendlier. So I wasn't sure, I got a degree, but I just wanted to do 3 years, see what it was like. And I literally went in off the street, if you like, to do the tests. And when they spotted I got a degree, they said, well, you should be going in as an officer, and explained. I said, well, my dad drives buses and my mum cooks school dinners. I'm not sure. And they explained that it's for everybody, sent me away to do sort of a testing event up in Catterick. And it was good. It really was tough and exposed you. And I remember being interviewed, and they said, so I'd be about 22. And they said, oh, you're fit. You've got the capacity of leadership, some of the things, but your knowledge about the army is pretty poor. Maybe you should do this 6-month attachment. And whilst we were there were these guys they had white tabs on, called an O-type engagement. And they were being screamed at all the time. And I thought, no, I don't like that. And so I took the chance and went to do the regular commissions board interview at the RCB, and was pretty much advised, well, it won't work. But fortunately, I managed to be accepted and suddenly found myself heading to Santos as an officer. But I hadn't told my parents, so that was quite a tricky one. It was a difficult one. I did eventually, and they were okay, as parents are. I've learnt that one over the years. They're a lot better than you expect. But Santos was tough. That was about 1984. I think there were 24 people in the platoon when I started, and 8 of us finished. I was then, because I joining the Royal Signals, but whilst I was there, I kind of said I wanted to switch to the Army Air Corps because I always wanted to fly. And I won't go into the details, but it wasn't a popular choice with the Royal Signals. And I was told, if you don't make it to go flying, then you're posted to Timbuktu. And I went to do the testing, which was done by the RAF at Cranwell, and managed to pass. So I was accepted by the Army Air Corps. However, when you finish Santos at that time, as a young officer, you then have to be exposed to a different arm, whether it's armoured or infantry or otherwise. And I said, I'd like to do armoured, which is tanks, because I thought it's inside, it's a bit warmer, it'd be quite and having a name Patrick, believe it or not, there were 3 or 4 of us who were going to the Army Air Corps. I was sent to this is the regiment they sent me to, the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars, because my name was Patrick. And I was posted to the regiment in Germany, in Munster. In fact, I arrived during an exercise called Exercise Lionheart. And my first arrival in Germany was to go straight into a tank with all these soldiers that I was going to be responsible for. I'd never been on a tank. So they were teaching me from the word go. And I really enjoyed my tour with the Irish Hussars. They were very cavalry officer, very wonderful people, just amazing, very much more military orientated, a lot of family history in the regiments, a lot of connections, and very, very different experience. And there I was, this strange chap in the mess with them. For all the time I was there, I had to wear a dinner jacket for dinner every night. Every night. It really loses its thrill. And they were very welcoming. They were really, really good. And the only mistake I made was we had this troop trials they would have, and all the different. I had my troop of tanks, and within the squadron, and then you were tested in like troop tests out in the the German training centres, training areas, and it's several days of pretty intense testing and training. And I lined up all the soldiers and said, I know nothing about tanks. I haven't been to Bovington and done all the training that all these other officers have. I've been to Sandhurst, and this is me. Help. And we all worked really, and we won troop training. We won. So popular with the, and it was like, how can that can't be right? But I think, to be honest, from that point of view, what I did learn from the military at that point was that if you work as a group, if you let people know what you don't know, sometimes you can find a better place rather than pretending what you might know. So that was good. That was a long time ago. Is that as far as I wanted to go? Because obviously then I went back to learn to fly. Middle Wallop. What a great name, Middle Wallop in the Wallops. It's just lovely. And it's a beautiful part of Wiltshire. And that was tough. That was really tough. So Sandhurst 24 cut down to 8. I think it was 23 cut down to 8 who passed it flying as well. So the sort of filtering was really, really tough. So I was really lucky all the way along. And I'm pretty sure I was like number 8 to go. I was the next to go. I was struggling at the end of the course. But I passed, and then had various different experiences and posted, and flew in Kenya and Germany, obviously, and then the UK, in Italy. Did a very brief time, a few weeks, with the Italian Army Air Corps, and that was hilarious because they don't talk to each other; they just shout over the radio. And they fly so high, all enemy can see them miles away. But they're really good in the mountains. But they've no idea with tactics. Sorry to any Italians listening. I don't mean to be rude. It's my memory of it. And they flew Hueys, and I'd read a book called Chicken Hawk, which had really inspired me with flying. In fact, one of my swimmers, Tom Robinson, is reading Chicken Hawk at the moment because I told him this story. And he keeps coming in saying, you know, when you twist the throttle on the collective lever and that puts the fuel in, does that? And I said, well, the helicopters that flew later on were automatic. That's governed automatically. And so before we even get in swimming, we're talking about helicopters. So all the stories are really valuable. It's lovely. It's lovely. Tom's wonderful, by the way. If Tom's listening, hi.
I could seriously. No, you're good. The stories that you have are it's so incredible, just the amount that you've experienced and gone through, but also the life lessons that you can hear and see, the life lessons that you've gone through. And one of the key parts I've found is a lot of that transference from your military background into the coaching world. Because there were some key parts that even you transferred, flying helicopters, and how you can transfer that into the swimming world. So for you, just what were some of the key points that you had taken away from the military into the next stage for you, your sort of life lessons, and how transferable were they into the coaching world?
Thank you. I think obviously when I left the military, Hannah, I think you were about 4 months old. You were very, very young. And I actually tried to get work flying. I didn't want to fly. It wasn't that I was afraid of it, or I just was like, I've done that, I'll try something else. But I wrote 105 letters to apply for different jobs and had one interview from those 105 because I was so out of date. Industrial design, what's your computer design experience? 0. It was in the 1970s. Didn't have computers. And the long and the short of it was I thought I better go back, and I very quickly did an 8-week crammer course to get my civilian license, which normally takes 2 years. And I did it at Oxford Kidlington with a young man that I met. He'd left the Navy at the same time as I left the Army, called Chris Patton. And I will jump forward on that one because Chris was just a genius who was photographic memory. He took not only all of the courses and passed everything, but he took extra ones, pressurization, anticipation of going fixed wing in the future. And he was an extraordinarily capable young man. And sadly, he did come to the North Sea, but he was killed on the Brent Spar. The tail rotor hit and it spun, and he ditched into the sea and sadly was killed. And we used to go swimming together. In fact, the very last photograph, Hannah, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, of him alive, is holding you in the kitchen in our old house in Brown Hills. That was the night before he was killed. It's quite tough, this. So the transferring from the military into civilian life was less of a jump because I was still flying, but it was very different because I'm now a family man. And in fact, Carmel is the rock that keeps everything together. My wife, when we came up, I came up first and I had to do the conversion onto the type of helicopter. I mean, it had 2 engines, so it was twice as complicated. It was much more difficult. And I had to learn to be a civilian pilot rather than a military pilot. Effectively, a military pilot, particularly in the army, is you're like a Land Rover that goes really fast, 6 feet above the ground. But in civilian life, you have all these really strange, complex things that are very, very different. And your view is normally clouds as you go through, heading out offshore. So it was getting used to that, Hannah, first. It was getting used to that difference. And I did focus more on, I did a lot of swimming. I did a lot of triathlon. So I kind of treated myself to do more. In fact, I was obsessed and unnatural and unhealthily obsessed. I would cycle into work, which was about 21 miles, fly a helicopter for the day, and then run around the airfield sometimes, cycle to Inverary, swim, and then go home. I don't know how I ate enough to do it. But once I got, we were delayed on some flights, and I did cycle in, I cycled back and had fingerless gloves with the tri-bars on the bike. And on the way back, I should have stopped, but I took the drink out of my bottle, and the bike had been put outside of the hangar outside, and it was frozen. It was that cold. And I can remember, the feeling of the flu going down, and I became hypothermic with about, 7 or 8 miles to go. And I got home, but I don't remember it. Carmel will tell you more about that. And after that, I stopped cycling into work. It's just too dangerous, especially in Scotland. But I'm still not answering the question, but I'll get there. I promise you I will get there. With enjoying exercise and just being obsessed, I recognize I was craving. Doing it on your own is one thing, but being involved in a group or an activity that involves more than just yourself is so important. So the club I was swimming with, I ended up coaching, ended up being the coach left, and one of the parents came to our house, Hannah, when you were very little, and just said, "Oh, we're really stuck. Would you coach?" Now, I had already coached in the military. I'd done my first teachers course when I was 16, and then I did the Army Swimming Union teachers and coaches course when I was in the Army. And so I was gathering my coaching qualifications and had at that time. So I quite happily took it on, and then gradually realized that in the military, you would fly and then perhaps have several other duties, whether it's accounts or inspections or developing or courses. And particularly as a young officer, you're very duty bound to do lots more than just fly. But in the civilian world, I was only asked to fly. I would finish and go, "So what's next?" And they go home. It was so coaching kind of filled that void, I guess, filled that gap. And I found that I had already coached when I was in my last posting in the Army. It was in Netheravon in England. And I'd coached or been involved in swimming and helping out with the club Triple S. And I'd enjoyed that. In fact, here's an interesting fact. I know that Graham Wardell, who, was head coach in the Commonwealth Games in 2014 and coached in Glasgow, is now coaching in Wales. He's younger than me, but he was my coach when I was swimming in Andover. It shows how young he is, incredibly young man. But I'm coaching at Geary, and I just found that it was good fun. Hannah, this is a point you and I probably won't cope with this, but in 1993, sadly, we lost your brother. And I think the way in which I dealt with a lot of it was working on the Aquapacer, developing it, producing it. And it was, I'm not sure if you got a pause button, but no, it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough. It's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm all right. But it was really hard because both Carmel and I had to sort of, at a relatively young age, come to terms with something that, the world doesn't normally throw at you. But we've been very, very fortunate because we've got 2 sons subsequent to that perhaps we wouldn't have had if it weren't for Thomas. And Hannah was 4 at the time, so it was quite hard for her to understand it and get it. But she was remarkable. And that was really, really hard. But you ask about experiences from the military. Well, the older I get, the more I realize you have a choice to be resilient or not. And some of that resilience is having the odd weep. And some of that resilience is just accepting that, this day will bring some things that will hurt you or push you or stretch you. But the point I mentioned there about Thomas is the point at which it does not get any worse. So it's kind of ironically helpful, which sounds maybe wrong, but perspective is very easy when those things have happened. But equally, looking back at it, I remember I definitely was so typically male, if that's the right phrase to say these days. But bury your head, just get on with things, deal with it, and run. And it's only later that it kind of hits you and you recognise the things. But I think the military background was very, very helpful, because there was a lot of capacity to work hard, capacity to take and push beyond what most people normally do. I think one of the reasons I got through Sandhurst was not my knowledge of everything, or was I did realise, and I recognise out on exercises, I quite enjoyed it. I was from Birmingham. I didn't go out in the woods. But when I did, I looked around and I saw people who had really good military background, but they were struggling in some areas. And I was like, I can do this. I can do this. And in fact, it'd be motivating, realising that you suddenly became relied upon because others were struggling. Watch everything that's happening in Ukraine at the moment. It kind of brings back huge thoughts and interests that, my impression of the nation is of a previous generation of people who do not question the reliance or request to get up and fight for your country. It's something that we just have removed from the world, thankfully, but we haven't removed it from the world, and there are still people that resilient and that extraordinary and brave and unquestioning. And I feel as if the world has changed a wee bit with that. And so pulling the army experience back to where you want it to be, Hannah, it was helpful. Yes, it was. I think the amount of leadership as a young officer you're demanded is you have to stand up and make yourself heard. And you have to accept that there's somebody above you who's going to make themselves heard when you're doing something wrong. And the sort of capacity to know where you sit is really comforting and really beneficial. And that structure is can be taboo or knocked in the modern world, but actually its value, I think, is misunderstood unless you've been in it. It has no intention to be wrong. It is purely designed to be 100% right, and it has clear boundaries, clear resilience, and clear regimentation where it comes from the army in order to simply do things that are right. So I think those values were probably more what I would have found was transferred into coaching. Try and do right by people. Don't go and don't be first in the queue to get your food. Be last, because everyone else needs to eat first. If somebody's looking like they're suffering when they're about to swim a race, go and talk to them. Try and see if you can make that bit better, because that will help the team.
And I think that's one.
Went on a bit there. I'm sorry.
But it was so valuable actually hearing it, because, as you say, it's the root of it that makes you the individual that you are today. And you're so right in that those values, especially for that leadership role, because as a coach, you're the leader within the team, and it is that team effort and that work ethic. And if you don't understand something, your ability to communicate. So I know personally that our relationship was grown and developed through that relationship of being able to, for me, follow your instruction, but also you to hear me out as well. So it wasn't just do what you're told. It was that balance of give and take, respect on both sides. And I do think as well that ability to feel like you have someone that can hear you out. With governing bodies, we've got set rules, but to know that you have a coach that will stand up for your values as an athlete, because the values as a coach and an athlete should be, relatively similar. And that's probably one of the reasons why I do personally feel that you are a well-respected and well-renowned coach, is because you stand up for what's right. You stand up for the athlete, and you're not afraid to stand up for what's right. And that's hugely, hugely valuable. And I do feel a lot of coaches, could learn a lot from that. And, hugely appreciative of, I guess, your military background from building that. So the next part I'd like to kind of go on to is, I guess, some of the stories that you have, I know personally from when you were flying, because a lot of people, assume you as a coach, you were a volunteer coach. It wasn't a paid position. Your paid work was as a helicopter pilot. But a lot of people think, oh, helicopter pilot, that's so cool. But it was an incredibly dangerous job. And I know personally there were times where I was afraid for you. And just some of the incidents, I guess, that happened being a helicopter pilot, and to kind of know a bit more about that.
Yeah, it was... the North Sea really kind of evolved in the 1970s, and it was a bit like the Wild West in America. I think that people were adventurously heading offshore, and I have no idea how it first started. Who kind of went, I'll tell you what, we'll just go all the way out there and we'll drill down and we'll just get some oil. It just seems so bizarre. But so the initial adventurers were adventurous, and I don't think anything would have happened if they weren't. But as time went on, regulation became much more focused on safety and the ability to guarantee safety, or best guarantee safety. I think when I arrived, the safety was good, but it got so much better, to be honest, in the time that I was there, from, let's say, 1989 through to about 2016. It was significantly improved right at the end, with consideration about things that weren't considered to be as important when I first flew there. For me, the first thing that shocked me was Chris getting killed about 10 months after I'd joined, and it was quite a shock. And then within a year, my company actually had an accident on the Cormorant Alpha, and there were 13 killed. And I obviously knew the pilots. One of them did live, and that they ditched in horrendous conditions, and were those who managed to survive were winched out in horrendous conditions. And I remember going that night kind of thinking, what have I done? I had, in the military, if somebody was injured or killed or happened, it was like, well, you signed the dotted line, it's kind of okay. But all of a sudden in the civilian world, I heard so many more than I'd heard in the military. It was quite shocking. And I guess that was just a bad time. There were accidents, and there were events, and there were things that were near misses as well, which people will not ever know about. There was a helicopter, Golf Tango Golf Kilo, that had a lightning strike, and the tail rotor was knocked off, with two friends of mine, Sid Roberts and Lionel Soul, and they did an incredible job ditching without a tail rotor. It's a bit like driving over, I don't know, it's like driving without wheels down a cliff. I don't know how it's almost impossible to survive, but they did it. And everybody survived. They walked out from the aircraft into a life raft. And I think the most uncomfortable thing was everybody getting sick in the life raft. So those men are very, very fortunate, and should have the rest of their lives grateful to the skills of those two. But I'm not sure the timeline now. I think it was about 6 months later. I took off from Aberdeen to go to Stornoway, and then head out to the northwest into the Atlantic Ocean to a rig called the Sovereign Explorer. And we landed and we flew back. And to cut a long story short, on the way back, we got hit by lightning. And I was actually flying at the time, and the cat I was flying as a co-pilot then, because of rank, whoever's the senior one flies in charge. And it was... it was like an explosion, and your response is to lower the collective lever, which is to allow the upflow of air to drive the rotors rather than the engines drive a downflow of air. Otherwise, if it's the engine that's the problem, you've got no drive, and therefore the blades will have no lift whatsoever, and you'll become a stone within 1.5 or 2 seconds. That can occur. So your instincts are to drop the lever, so you go into an immediate descent, and it's pretty terrifying for the passengers. The conditions were really bad. And we limped our way back which took a long time because it was 65 or 70 knots of wind. Then they didn't have limitations; they now have. We eventually landed on, but as we were going back, everything was shaking so violently. It was pretty spectacular, and I guess in most other conditions, the consideration to ditch would have been uppermost. It was, but it wasn't survivable. So we were very fortunate. When we did land and everybody kind of disappeared out of the aircraft, we had to close the blades down as they slowed down. We had 4 blades on that aircraft, and the one in the sort of 2 o'clock position, I think it was the 10 o'clock position. You could see there were about 2 feet missing from the rotor blade. So the lightning had gone out of the blades, and just obliterated it. But the opposite one, the 4 o'clock, was exactly the same, with the same amount blown away. And with the inquiry, and you can see that inquiry on if you Google the investigation branch website, the amount of electricity that went through the aircraft and got dissipated was huge, was massive. And there was lots more damage to the aircraft. All the leading edges of the blades were burst and inflated. And 2 things. One, it was very, very fortunate. The 2 being the same amount allowed the aircraft to be at least handleable. It wouldn't have taken much for it to be nothing, not handleable at all. So we were very, very, very lucky. And secondly, it showed how robust that particular aircraft was. It was a really tough aeroplane, the Super Puma or Tiger, as we called it. So that was kind of nasty. But I got flown back with the captain that night, another crew. In fact, I went out for a meal recently, Hannah, and some of the guys who were having the meal with me commented, "Oh yeah, I didn't realize one of the pilots was my friend who'd flown us back. I think I was in shock, and I just got back and I wiped my brain of lots of stuff." And he'd said, "I remember going out that night, this extra call to go and pick Patrick up from this rig." And it took a week or more before the helicopter got back because the weather was so bad for that period. So those things happen. Those things happen. Statistically, it's still safer to fly than to drive. So I don't want anyone who's a pilot or involved in aviation complaining to you, Lauren, but it is. But the North Sea is and has been challenging. What I will say is, and I was involved in the line training. I was a senior line training captain in the company at the end of my career. And it was a real privilege to try and work to improve the quality and the ability of the pilots and the safety factors and the wherewithal for the company I worked for, Bristow, was unbelievable, the best in the world as far as I'm concerned. So the ability to improve and to work on that, and that's proven by the record of flights offshore these days. You very rarely hear of things, so it's good. It's good.
Just going to ask, so being a helicopter pilot is quite full on, quite busy. We have a rota.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you could let people know, balancing that as a swimming coach, how did you do it? How did you manage it? Because, you've got to write training scripts, sessions, there's competitions, just being able to balance the life of a full-time working individual and then being able to volunteer coaching. Just a little snapshot into the life of Patrick Miley.
I can demonstrate that. Have a look. God.
For anyone listening on the audio, Patrick has gone to this cupboard behind him and he's now pulling out lots of books. Very thick books. Wow. Okay. This is going to...
They're long books. So they're for me. I mean, there's 24 in the cupboard there of logbooks. And these are all... So every day, I would simply script out what the session schedule was and write it in and record it and have it ready and available. And would have it either available to myself or to the mentor or assistant coaches that I would have at the time. They were never paid. None of us were paid. So it was scripted. I'd plan it out and I would script it with in mind the fact that I may or may not be there. So it wasn't even as if my job was 9 to 5. It could be 3 a.m. till midday. So I could be there in the afternoon. So I had to almost react from day to day. So planning and scripting it out, and those, if I put all of those A4 academic diaries together. They're all populated. And they're probably as tall as Hannah. And probably most of that covers her career. In fact, I would say pretty much every stroke that she's ever had is scripted in these diaries. So that was one way. It was just planning ahead. I can say this now because I won't lose my job, but the odd time when I was flying, I would write the odd schedule on the back of a planning sheet that was for aviation. But that was never dangerous because it was always part of still being aware of what we're doing. Now I do look back and I'm not sure how I did it. But there was a period of time where the rota changed as a working roster for pilots that changed in the last few years of your career, Hannah. And it was what they called an equal time roster. And some people would work 7 days on, 7 days off. And I ended up with the pattern was something like 6 on, 2 off, 8 on, 9 off. And so there were various different rotations. Every 42 days, you'd end up with 21 days off. So when you have 21 days off, I know what I was doing those 21 days. I was either coaching or planning coaching for the 21 days when I'm not off. And when I was on, if I could be coaching, I would be coaching. So it was quite a strict regime of sleep, organised plan. That was, not a great social life for quite a few years.
I can imagine. It sounds like you probably had no time for anything else. I don't even know when you ate. I don't know how you managed to fit that in. But
pilots get fed offshore. In fact, the risk we get these metal trays that come up, sit on your lap, and you order your food. In fact, it's the highlight of the flight going offshore.
I'm sure
you're calling the rig or the platform. In fact, Well, yeah, me too. Well, but still, I miss this. You'd be like, this particular platform you're going to, they do a really good ice cream. Yeah, you would order it, make sure you got it. Great. So that's when I ate.
Oh yeah, well, I'm glad you did eat. It's always important to eat, that's for sure. I always found and do find now the story of yourself and Hannah and what you did in sport and all those kinds of things just so fascinating and inspirational. And actually, I've told Hannah this before, but the athletes that I work with now, often you two come up in conversation. Wow. And will continue to always just, and I find swimmers that are just like, oh my gosh, they did that, or, and it's just amazing to be able to just have witnessed a tiny part of that. But you fit it in. And you also, you've already mentioned it before, and so has Hannah, but the Aquapacer.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to just explain how that came about, when that came about, and just kind of the journey with that. And also the swimmers that you put through hell with it.
Yeah, thank you. I had yesterday, I was coaching yesterday and I had to race away. I had a dentist appointment. And as I left the dentist, I went past Sinclair's jewellery shop in Inverary, Hannah, you know it. And they had the same watches, the Casio watches that I had in about 1979, 1980, where I cut the straps off the watch because it was like a digital watch. It was quite a digital watch. And you could set a rundown time of anything above 10 seconds would beep for 10 seconds or more. Anything below 10 seconds would beep for 1 second. So I cut the straps off and fed them onto my swimming goggles. And if I put a beep every 5 seconds and I get 3 strokes in every 5, I could mathematically work out how I was swimming. And then I noticed when I was watching the clock that it was correlating with the speed at which I was swimming at. So I was, at the time, I think I was going to do a Masters 1500 or something event. And I thought, and I suddenly thought, if I tweak it, and the more I tweaked it, the more I realized that I controlled my own speed. And it's obvious if you increase a gear on a car, you go faster and vice versa. So then I got another watch and put it on the other side. And I would set like 30 seconds. So if we're going to hold a 22-minute, 30-pace short course, I set 30 seconds, then I get the beep. And then reduce that. And there was a point where I would go into the pool and I could feel the lifeguard as I get my goggles ready to be going like, here he is. What's he doing? But I realized that the attenuation of the skull is brilliant with noise. I didn't realize it until I put the watch on. And there was a colleague of mine at work, Nick Norman, who's just an absolute genius with electronics. I mean, genuinely a genius with electronics, and he's a remarkable man. And I spoke to him about it because every now and then we'd fly with, that's what I do miss about flying. You'd sit and have really wonderful conversations with different people every day. Really, some stories that I could never match, just incredible. But Nick was remarkable and commented that he could help. So we met and we discussed it, and he started to produce these little prototypes. And I was quite, I don't know, it was overconfident, but I was confident and contacted Speedo and said, oh, you really should see it. I've got something that's going to change the world of swimming. And they said, right, we'll come down to Nottingham, as it was then. And I do remember, and apologies for everyone in Speedo who might have been there, I went, no, you come here. And they sent this guy up. And Hannah, you don't know this, I hired a car that day because the car we had was so rubbish. I hired this really fancy car, picked him up. And as I'm driving away, I'm thinking, I could see this thing in the corner, so hurts or whatever it was. I'm trying to shift it out of the way so he doesn't see it. But then I got invited down to Speedo and did some demonstrations with it, with prototypes that I had. And unfortunately, I think the way things were changing, it wasn't going to work. And they weren't really a technology company. I went out to Finland, to Polar on May the 1st. I didn't realize it, but everyone in Finland on May the 1st every year is drunk, without exception. It's not the day to go and have a meeting with a tech company. Everybody was drunk. I mean, I'm not joking. I walked out from the hotel. I thought, I'll have a look around this Turku in Finland. I thought, Turku sounds nice. It's freezing cold. I'm walking out, and there was no cars because everybody was drunk. But and they were very good, but it never came to pass. So I'm struggling with some of the prototypes. I did start working with Paul Palmer through Ian Turner, who was his coach, and Ian was just so supportive and helpful and wonderful, because I went down to Lincoln to try and do some work and left them with a prototype. And it is especially in those days, it's quite complex to have a programming electronic device on a pool deck that you then put the data in and give it to the swimmer. And Ian was absolutely top-notch as a coach, understood it, and as every coach would be these days, the one thing he doesn't want to be distracted by trying to learn something. So we taught Paul, and Paul would program it, and he knew how to do it. And so Ian would say what he wanted. And sometimes, I remember he went away on a camp, and we programmed like 4 programs to go in one beeper, and it was all of his sort of holding sets for the camp. But the initial product was resin-based, because I couldn't afford to pay for PC printed circuit boards, which is like a production line criteria. We just had all the electronics floating around, and Nick was a genius with it all, and then pour in resin, put it in the oven, and if it doesn't explode, it survives, and there's another 200 quid. So, and we just had a few, and I tried various people to get to use it. So going into the 96 Olympics, actually, there was Paul Palmer was using it, and he got Olympic silver, so that was a big bonus. But even people around who, if they're listening, but Adam Rockwood, Marie Hardiman, Nick Gillingham were also people that were using it. And it was just a real privilege to meet and get involved. I felt like a bit of a cuckoo, because I fly helicopters, coach, but these guys are at a much higher level than I'm used to, and I'm learning from what they're doing using something that's really essentially just an idea. I think after Paul's success, the press was wonderful. Was it Paul's a bleeping marvel? The Sun, great, well done. What was the other one? Oh, he simply got it off pat. Was another headline. So these really corny, and they would turn up at the front door of the house. All these press guys, can we have a comment after his silver medal? By that time, I was in partnership with a guy called Richard Berry, who was my business advisor. Actually, and he was brilliant, just brilliant. He was just the business brains, if you like, and we, for years, worked together and didn't take a penny out of the business. We did not do anything. We both had jobs, so we invested in developing it and producing it. And I went to, I think, 97 or 90. No, yeah, 97 was my first coaches conference in Florida, in America, in Orlando. And I was asked to speak about, at the time there were loads of books about like PCs for dummies. So it was Stroke Rate for Dummies was my talk, Stroke Rate for Dummies. You can probably see it somewhere. And I think a few people turned up for it. And we had the Aquapacer as a product. And it was really good to be able to, and in 1998 it was in Atlanta, and the same sort of was talking, but also we had the product as a stand. And gradually more and more people were using it. But after the 96 Olympics, someone called Brooke Bennett, her coach Peter Banks, I met at the World Coaches Conference, which happened to be in Birmingham in about 96, 97. And he kind of mentioned, Peter's lovely and he's an Irish American. I have a swimmer who you might know called Brooke Bennett. And I knew Brooke. I happened to know because she was only 14 when she got bronze at the World Championships with an incredibly high stroke rate on the outside lane. And I actually had even recorded her rates. I used to have a laptop which didn't have a hard drive, had 2 floppy drives. And I used to sit. I did analysis of like Nick Gillingham all through his career and others with all these numbers. It was nuts. But Peter was really good. So I was working, trying to get as much out of the understanding and learning myself, but also helping think about stroke rates. And to cut a long story short on that one, she went and won Olympic gold in 1996, in pretty close to 8:28, but actually defended a title in 2000 in 8:19, and also won the 400 free as well. So she added to her army with 3 Olympic golds. So that was really good fun. Really good fun. I worked out in Stanford for a wee bit with Richard Quick, who sadly is no longer with us. And the girls there, they were incredible athletes, 17 female athletes, Jenny Thompson, Dara Torres, and many, many others that were all Olympians and medalists. And that was intimidating in a different way. They were just so focused and so professional and so deeply involved. And to me, some there that really took my imagination was Misty Hyman. And I know Hannah's actually met Misty. But she was just smart. You could see that she got it. And she actually went to 2000, as we know, and won the 200 fly. I'm not claiming anything on that, but I'd like to think that she was using the Aquapacer for some of her preparation.
This is what I mean, Patrick. When you were developing and changing the world of swimming, I was just learning to walk in 95, maybe 96. So, this is where the term legend comes out, because it's incredible to hear all these kinds of stuff.
You've got obviously the logbooks that's pretty much got my whole career, any training set. So, anybody listening out there, you reach out to Patrick. You can ask what day, time, session. Patrick's got it all written down into the logbooks. But curious to know, you learn as you went along as well. And I think that adaptability to be able to take on your environment and learn, regardless of whether it's good experiences or negative experiences, you use that to kind of grow and develop. But I'd love for you to talk about some of the training sets that Peter Banks had asked you to actually program into the Aquapacer, because some of them are pretty insane. And I think it'd be so interesting for people listening to actually hear what some of these training sets that someone like Brooke Bennett did as, I guess, a distance swimmer.
Yeah, Peter, forgive me if you're listening to this, but Peter is just a delightful human being, and in my view, the most honest coach I've ever met. And he kept swimming uber straightforward, very simple, but smart at the same time. I think the best things in life that are effective are simple. And he called me one day, and at the time, I think it was Fridays, I used to have a fax phone at home. Fax, those who don't know what fax is, if you Google it, you can have a look, you'll find out. He used to phone on a Friday and just say, there'd be like, I think it was 6 or 8 50s at a set stroke rate. Because Brooke, we worked on exactly the rate that had got her to do a 400 and an 800 pace, and then recognised to squeeze it to a pace. This was building between 1997, the World Championships, and 1998. and he would simply send what time she would do for that rate over 6 or 850s, and it come through. And as a side point, it was interesting because when I first met Peter, one of the questions I had for him was, she's won Olympic gold, what's her best 400 free time? And he said, it's 4:10. And I said, so what's her ambition? And he said, well, my ambition is her coach's world record, which was 8:16 at the time with Janet Evans. And she had gone 8:27.8, I think was her best Olympic time. So it was way, way off. And my comment to him back was, well, when Janet Evans went 8:16, she went through 400 in 4:07. So you have to be able to go 4:07, but you can even think of 800, it's 8:16. And so that was the target from September to January. She did all these stroke rate controlled sets and ultimately went to the World Championships in January and went 4:07.07 and hit exactly the stroke rate that we had been planning on. There was nobody more sort of shocked than me, even though I was advocating this is what it is. You don't expect it to work. He's like, oh. But he would then send sets through, say, right, I need you. And he had an Aquapacer, a prototype one. And it wasn't the easiest to program, but the flexibility, amount of program you could put in with a twin quad flat pack microcontroller, a TQFP microcontroller, was stretched to its limit. And sometimes he would say, quarterly say fax or message, and I can't program something. And I said, well, let's phone and talk about it. And you have one and I'll have one. So I had an Aquapacer next to the phone, and he has his. I said, right. I said, what's the set you want to do? He said, right, I need her to go 10 400s. So, all right, 10 400s. Short goes along, it's long course, so that's easier. Right, so you put this 50 in, and that 50 in, and this 50 in, and you copy. And then, and I said, so what's the rest interval between the 400s? And forgive me, Peter, if you're like, I'm sure he said 15 or 20 seconds. And I said, well, you put this in, and you copy. I said, right, then when you download that into it, he went, no, hold on, we haven't finished. I said, oh, right, okay, there's more. I said, yeah, then I'd like her to go 10 300s. I said, okay. So at what pace? It says 110 per 100 pace. I said, the same pace. Oh, right, we copy. I said, gap between the 300s, you went 15 seconds. I said, okay. What about the gap between the 10 4s and the 10 3s? I said, give her a minute. So she had a minute. And then I said, right, now when you download it, he went, no, hang on. I said, don't tell me. It's 10 200s. And he went, have you done this set before? I said, no, I've never done this set before. So he said 10 200s. And then after it, I'm like, Peter, surely not. He went, yeah, then 10 ones. So 10 4s, 10 3s, 10 2s. That's 10,000 meters. One set. Having a beep in your head. People go mental for less. And I said, so when this is going to kill me. I said, when you download it, make sure that your battery's full, because it's quite a lot of data to go down. And he went, no. I said, what? He said, I needed to do that twice. I'm like, what? 20,000 meters. So then you go and win Olympic gold. You win 3 Olympic gold medals, and you wonder why. Goodness me. However, that's historic now. I don't think we do those sorts of sets anymore. But joking aside, you said, hang on, 2014, pick a date in 2014, I'll tell you what Hannah did, all right? And by the way, some of these typed ones that are in my logbook are when Hannah's away, and it's her sending the sets back to me that I then print out and put in. So not only was it was a one-way street, there was a significant discipline from Hannah feeding back a 7,800 meter set here in, where was this? Hannah, where were you in October 2013?
Yeah, where were you in October 2013?
Yes.
I think I might have been up a mountain. I think that was the first altitude camp, wasn't it?
Right, so you've just arrived at altitude.
You know this.
Oh, hang on, it was week 2. Oh, yeah, it was altitude camp. Yes, you were 56,500. So I was wondering why it was so low. It's because you were altitude.
So low.
Yeah, 56k for that week is a lot less than I used to do.
Yeah,
56.1.
I'm sure.
Like,
I know Hannah's gone to altitude and done 120,000 meters, and that wasn't with me, by the way. Yeah, definitely altitude. Week 2, 67,800. Sorry, pick a date, Lauren.
I'm going 28th of February because that's my birthday.
Oh, 28th of February. What was Hannah doing on your birthday?
What were you doing on my birthday, Hannah?
I'd laugh if it was a rest day.
Rest day.
More importantly, what were you doing, Lauren?
Probably eating cake, Patrick, let's be honest.
Oh, this is so disappointing.
No. Is it not it?
Like the one day the printer wasn't working.
What I can tell you is that... No, I can't tell you. It's in the back. The wrong year, didn't I?
29th of March.
We've got it here. Right, that week, Hannah went 70,500. And the 28th of February was... I think this far too seriously. It was a Friday. She didn't swim on that. Oh, no, she did swim on that Friday. I beg your pardon. She did, that day was a recovery day. It's 13,000 total.
Recovery, 13K.
7,000 in the morning. You were doing check D speed, 4 1,000s, 1 back, 1 IM, 1 free, 1 MI. That was your main set. Okay. Did you get that?
Wow. Yeah, I got that.
Oh, I think she...
That was the morning.
My swimming brains.
In the afternoon, she's doing a check C sponge breaststroke set, but the main set was 3 rounds of 450s back of 110, 200 easy free, 2 ones back of 150, 200 easy free, 200 back, timed into recovery 400, 3 rounds. I'm just seeing whether you were tired. You were going 30.6, 30.4, 30.7, 30.6 for the backstrokes.
Well done, Hannah. There's so many coaches listening to this now writing the sets down. What was that one? That is now the end of part 1 of Patrick Miley's episode with us on the Honest Athletes podcast. We really hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward for you to join us next week for part 2, where we talk a little bit more about Hannah and Patrick's story, as well as many other amazing things. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.